Welcome to My View from the Piano Bench. We do this on Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. here on my Joe Holt's Notes YouTube channel, in addition to Piano for My Friends on Thursday evenings. On Wednesdays, I talk about experiences or concepts or ideas or things related to making music. I move the phone camera a little closer so I don't feel like I have to yell to be heard. You don't see as much of the keys. I probably will play something. Who knows what I'll do. I'm becoming increasingly comfortable and used to living the life with inside of me of who knows what I'll do. In fact, that's when I probably do my best, whatever that best is. Thank you to those of you who support and encourage me via the links you'll find on the support page of my website. You'll see that link in the video description. And if you do watch with some regularity, I'll ask you to consider that. The Patreon option is a simple recurring take on the tip jar, and recurring support will incur from me a thank you email each month with exclusive content, exclusive to supporters. So thank you. That in effect sponsors these videos. Much appreciated. So in recent months, I've kind of changed my focus and picking a topic each week, sometimes a song title, sometimes an experience, and I'm just letting myself go and finding I can explore places that I wouldn't have thought of. And as it occurs to me right now, probably not unrelated to a Keith Jarrett quote I recite often. You've probably heard me say it. It's a paraphrase. When I sit at a piano, my hand knows what to do. And if I try to tell my hand what to do, I'm stopping it. Not only am I stopping it, I'm stopping it from doing something better than I can think of. And that's kind of what I'm going for. It has its disadvantages, but two sides to everything. Actually, probably many sides to everything all the time. So I'm titling this topic Big Band Reunion. And up until a few minutes before I started, it was going to be something else. And I'm allowing myself to be spontaneous with it, not knowing where it's going to go, but realizing it could go all over the place, just like my playing. So I feel good about that. And the reason I'm calling it Big Band Reunion, this is actually something specific and will be a version of a specific post-game show about a specific gig, which was just this past Sunday. So it's fresh in my mind and fresh with me and fresh with everyone involved. So if you follow me, you'll know that the Mediri Brothers Big Band had what they're calling a reunion concert, which is an appropriate word, at a college theater outside of Salem, New Jersey, Salem Community College. And it was an opportunity they were given to bring their big band back together. The big band has played a handful of times, or you could count them on one hand in recent years, at least recent decade or even 2 decades, or close to it. Paul and I were talking about that last night, that the big band was probably working until it might be 15 years ago. It was less, and then the culture changed and it kind of moved somewhere else. But the big part of the reunion, the exciting part for everybody, was to bring Paula Johns back with the band. So which direction do I want to go? Let me just kind of clarify that the other night, Sunday night, we had a concert. Last year, the Mediri Brothers Sextet performed for that organization. It's an arts-based organization, and everybody was thrilled and booked the band again for this year. And then they contacted Joe and said, "We got some additional funding. We'd like you to bring a bigger band." And then Joe and Paul got the idea to make it their big band, 15 pieces in total, including Paula and Joe, Mediri up front. And they created for themselves a whole lot of work. And that's an appropriate thing to talk about a big band as opposed to a small group. And it is certainly a labor of love music is in general for those who do it exclusively in particular in terms of a career. And if you have something like a big band where you have to write arrangements and you have all kind of logistical concerns and you have all kind of physical things you have to move around, uh, that could be like a full-time job in and of itself. Not even counting the playing. Uh, and it's just an absolute labor of love. And they took that labor of love on uh, to pull things together for this concert. So let's start with this. When you have a big band, with minimal exception, and there is exception, you will typically have, or almost always, have written arrangements. And think of it like an orchestra. When the conductor gets up and conducts a symphony orchestra or community orchestra or any kind of orchestra of classical music, they're waving their stick, and what they're doing is they're conducting everybody out there reading their music. They're conducting the interpretation of the music, so everyone's on the same page. They're only like able to coordinate like that because they're all playing written music, and that written music is in a sense arranged by the composer, even if the composer composes directly for that orchestra. In other words, if somebody writes an orchestral piece and they have all these instruments and stuff, they decide what goes where. They could hear a melody in their head and they could decide where the melody goes in the flutes or the melody goes in the trombone section or whatever. And it becomes not just the music they hear, but it becomes how to orchestrate it, how to arrange it. There's all kind of ways to do it, right? And the conductor is conducting the orchestra in order to bring them all into one place reading that music. And that would be chaos if there wasn't music to read, because everybody would be, you can just imagine. I don't have to explain that. Now, you would think that jazz wouldn't have that because, jazz is improvised and jazz is more intuitive. But actually, you're only able to be free. This is actually not an absolute statement, but I'm going to make it as an absolute statement in this context. You're only able to be free if you have a structure in which you're working. And the music itself, the tunes, the songs provide that structure. But in the big band era, when all that started happening, particularly in the late 20s and into the 30s, you began to have a set sort of orchestral arrangement, not the instruments that are in a symphony orchestra, but saxophones, clarinets, secondarily, trombones, trumpets, piano bass drums, or a rhythm section. And that was your basic big band. Or actually, before it was bass, it was tuba, piano, tuba, drums. Or it could have been banjo, tuba, drums, right? But you had a rhythm section, and you had saxophones, trumpets, and trombones, brass and reeds. And it is absolutely possible, if you have, decent musicians, who can like figure out like a riff to play. We call it a riff tune, and then people can harmonize it. And you can come up with basic little what they call head arrangements. But for the most part, these arrangements are thought out. They're like the classical pieces, right? And if the composer actually writes the arrangement, then the composer for the jazz tune or the whatever we call it is doing the same thing that the classical composer does, speaking it through the particular instruments in the big band. But oftentimes in jazz, the song is pre-existing. We're playing whatever we're playing, but the arranger has to decide, who's got the melody where, who plays the hits behind what's open for solos, so there is an improvisational element, certainly, to big band arrangements that typically doesn't exist in classical music. But the point here a long way around the barn, which is the only way I know to get around the barn. Like, if I had a better skill set in this area, I would just go into the barn and come out the other side. That's a straight line. I don't have straight lines. Gets me in trouble sometimes. Maybe often. Maybe I'm always in trouble and I just never realize it anymore. But anyhow, what was I talking about? Did I mention ADD? Not yet. But I will. But I already did. Okay. So anyway, that arrangement is the same kind of pencil and paper thing that the classical musician does. And the whole point is, in order to have one song played by a big band, especially before there were computers and stuff, you had to have a guy who was the arranger, who might not necessarily play in the band. His job, what he gets his paycheck for every week, is just writing arrangements for the band, back in the day anyway. And he would write the score, he'd figure out how to arrange it, and then he would do the transpositions, and he would write the individual parts. So you would have like all this paper, all this time, all this for 3 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever of music that people are reading through. So that's a time commitment. So an example of an arranger would be Fletcher Henderson for Benny Goodman. If you're not like a kind of hardcore traditional era jazz fan, you might not know the name Fletcher Henderson. But he had a big band in the late, I think he started in the late 20s, and into the early to mid 30s. And his band, of course, it was over. Yeah. Okay, this is politically incorrect. Maybe, I don't know. I'm trying not to be politically incorrect. Because we would say black musicians, and I guess we still do. Because nowadays you want to say African American, but that's not the term used then. But anyway, black musicians, segregation. He was like one of the prominent big bands, if not the prominent big band on that side of the street, so to speak. And Benny Goodman hired Fletcher Henderson as his arranger. And I think, by that time, Fletcher Henderson had disbanded his band, but he had all of these charts. And he brought them over to the Goodman book, but he also wrote new stuff. And, Benny Goodman was smart. But I would think he was also not just smart, he was doing the right thing, in that he was racially integrating his band openly as well on stage, starting small with his trio and quartet, and he was the first person, the white musician, to do that. But also recognizing that if you're going to actually have jazz, you're going to marry those cultures. And it's an interesting marriage when you have the improvised music and you have the actual written structure, right? And all of that to say, probably not very eloquently, that big band is a lot of work. It's a big commitment. And the big band has done, like I say, the mid-area band, a small handful of concerts in the last 15 years. And never one like this. Never one when we had the opportunity to bring the vocalist back. And the vocalist had all these arrangements written for her. Paula would request tunes back when the band was working that she would like to sing that were more contemporary than just old tunes. One Less Bell to Answer was one, Close to You was another. And Joe would write arrangements and put in tons of time. By the way, who was paying Joe for that? If you're looking on the outside, you're going to say, okay, well, I'm going to write an arrangement, so I need to be paid for that time. There's no one to pay you for that time. If you're going to be paid for the time as a businessman, you're going to build that into your fee, right? But, big bands aren't working now because people only want to hire bands way smaller. There's just the whole, bottom line is that unless you're doing it at some mega level, there's an absolute labor of love involved, as there is in music in general. So Paula came back in, and from what I understand, Joe and Paul Mederi asked her what of the songs she used to sing with the band she wanted to do. And so she picked them. And then Joe and Paul dug up the arrangements, and in almost every case, they were, on paper. They had lots of notes written on them. They were aging. There was disagreements between parts because, maybe this person didn't make the change over here. And so Paul took on the very time-consuming task of putting them into his computer and printing them out on whatever software he uses. And Joe was talking, okay, I'm going to just say it, last night. I'm recording this on Monday. So Joe was talking yesterday about, like, Paul calling him, and saying, okay, I'm at this measure and I'm in this thing, and I'm going to send you a picture of this because I don't know if you mean this note and I can't read this, and shouldn't this be over here? And Joe's like, I don't even remember doing this. Yeah, Joe and Paul are very good for each other in that way. They're identical twins, but they're very opposite personality-wise in some important respects. And Joe's sort of like the Zen guy who goes through in his own little planet, and I can relate to that. That's where Joe and I connect. And Paul is very cerebral and very meticulous, and everything's laid out in the row, and he goes from one thing to the other. And in a way, and I never thought of this until just now. This is not a direct parallel, but it reminds me of what little I know about Walt Disney and his brother Roy. Roy was the person who had his feet on the ground. He wound up being, the salesperson, for Walt Disney, and much of what Walt Disney created would have just stayed there in creative land if it wasn't for somebody helping to make it happen, which was his brother Roy. And I always said, I need a brother Roy. But in some regards, in some ways, Joe and Paul absolutely complement each other. But at least dozens of hours, at least, to get this gig together, which was and they questioned it. It's like, is this going to work? And and we don't have, and in fact, they were reluctant to get an old picture of the band, which they finally did to put out for promotion, because there was no recent picture of the big band. And what they did was they posted a picture from probably the 90s of the big band and a separate picture of Paula from the same era. But Joe noted that entire saxophone section, they're gone. They were all old pro veteran guys at the time. It was great. It was a wonderful sax section. And, they were reluctant to put that out there. Understandably, but it's been a long, long time. But you don't have to kiss me once, twice, or once again, unless you really want to. Now, we did not play that song. In fact, we really built the gig around Paula, and most of the tunes she sang, except for two, were more contemporary tunes in the big band era. But we did do some of the flag waver big band things. Woodside, 1 o'clock jump, Don't Be That Way. I actually was thinking about calling this video Don't Be That Way, and just talking about that particular tune and folding the big band experience into that tune. And I decided, no, I just need to call it Big Band Reunion. Let me talk about this tune for a minute. So it was the opening tune for Benny Goodman's Carnegie Hall concert in 1938, the historic first time that non-classical music was featured in Carnegie Hall. And even today, but certainly back when I was coming up, jazz musicians, that was a staple in their record collection. The recording from the 1938 Carnegie Hall concert. And it's a tune seldom done today. And I guess it's more associated with Benny Goodman than anybody else. And like Benny Goodman just doesn't carry a lot of weight anymore in contemporary culture. But I like playing that tune. And here's where I decide if I want to get wonky or not. Let me think about it. I decided to keep it going a little bit for the illustration of that being a tune. Once you get past the melody, and the melody is not super innovative, it's a riff and it just keeps repeating and it's cool. But then it play through the tune. Now imagine that first chorus is all written out. The one person who probably has the most latitude in the big band as far as like playing exactly what's on the page is the piano player, which is good for me. I'm cool with that. But everyone else, yeah, because I think the saxes are playing that melody, because I think the brass, like a trumpet strokes, are playing the percussive hits, right? And of course, the only way that's going to happen is if everybody agrees to it, and the way to agree to it is to be told what to do, and everybody agrees to read what's on the paper, right? So that would be an example. And then when you have the improvisation that happens, there's still scripted elements behind it, like if the saxophone player is improvising, there might be brass hits behind it that are written in this arrangement, or there might be sax stuff underneath the brass player or whatever. But you have that freedom in the second chorus to improvise, and that's kind of the jazz we're talking about. And if I were to talk about this particular tune, and I guess I am for a minute more, uh, it's kind of similar to I've Got Rhythm, or what we call rhythm changes in jazz. You know. But it's just recurring progression of chords, and then you get to the bridge. Wait a minute. And then you have this string of secondary dominants, or a circle of fifths going around. So even if you don't know what that means, it's formulaic. It's a particular thing. So a particular thing happens in the A section, a particular thing happens in the B section. And then so many tunes are written on top of that. One that I always, do for fun. Meet the Flintstones. It's the same chord progression as I've Got Rhythm, as do many, many other jazz tunes. Don't Be That Way is a variation on that theme. And you kind of have to know the tune in particular. And that A section is very much like Rhythm Changes or I've Got Rhythm, except it's a little more simplified. It's simply a 1, 6, 2, 5, 1, 6, 2, 5, 1, 6. And if you don't know what that is, you kind of think heart and soul. That's funny. That melody goes over the same chord progression. Wish I could play it. Samson might be rolling over in his grave at the moment. No, Heart and Soul is actually a cool tune. It just, became what it became later. So you have that thing that musicians could consider boring because it just happens over and over. And then in the bridge, if we're talking about musical wonkiness, the string of secondary dominants goes back one and plays an additional one for this tune. E7, the G7, and then E flat, C7, F7, and that's sort of the surprise. So if you listen to Don't Be That Way, see if you can find the general similarities to I Got Rhythm, but then very specific differences. Like there's no other tune that I know of that is written over exactly the chord progression of Don't Be That Way, which is kind of a variation on I've Got Rhythm. And for what it's worth, that tune just always sticks out to me, and I like to play it, although it's been a long time since I've done it. A little slower. Something like that. I have no idea what I'm doing. Oh, I just like that tune, and all this talk about that particular tune. That was the opening tune for the show. We went from that into 1 o'clock jump, which is a bassy thing, and starts out with a fun piano solo up front, which was actually good. Paul and I were talking about this. Talk about post-game shows. If you've seen the video from a month or so ago, where musicians will talk with each other about a gig after it just happened. There was a lot of that going on last night. Paul and I both had long drives home. We connected with each other on the drive at some point, talked for a little bit. But Paul and Joe also talked on their drives home. And then I got home, and I wound up having a 3-hour conversation on the phone with Paul. A lot of it about that gig. That energy, man. You know, it's like it's like I said, we don't do this because it makes sense, particularly in terms of the time we invest in it. But there are other rewards than financial, which are more important and more lasting and more beautiful. So, what does that have to do with anything? So, Paul was making the remark that in that second tune, in 1 o'clock jump, if you listen to the bassy version, there's a piano solo up front. It's just the rhythm section, the All-American rhythm section, the 4 piano, guitar, bass, drums. And that section was written for me to play through, I think, twice, maybe 2 or 3 times over the blues progression, but Joe just keep going, keep going, keep going. It was working. Paul was just remarking that was the time when the rhythm section just felt like it was just really locked together. And I don't know if Joe did this consciously or not, but looking back at it in an armchair quarterback way, it was a good move to make that the second tune after the kind of the obligatory first tune. And just allow the rhythm section to just gel. You know, and you know, Pat, Mercury and guitar, just quarter note chords. And you know, me just fortunately, you know, I was in the zone that I'm supposed to be, which is not like seeing what I can impose on it, but I was just falling into it, and we're all falling into it. And it was really, really fun. And if there is a recording of this, maybe some video, I'm not sure, but if there's a way I can get you to hear some of this, I will do that. I did record the first set, by the way, on my phone, as sitting here, which is not great balance for the band and everything. But part of me wants to just like crop out that particular block, that piano solo, you know, in part because not like, oh, it's piano, I don't care about anything else, but you don't really hear the rest of the band so well. But I'm right in the middle of the rhythm section, so I think it would be cool to crop that out. Maybe I'll do it. Maybe that'll be my documentation of this. Remind me I said that, because I'm not writing it down, and I won't remember I said it in about 12 seconds, because I'll say, what was I talking about? Wait, but that was important. And then I think we played the arrangement of the Pink Panther theme. And now this is Joe being, you know, a smart programmer. So back in the day, you wouldn't necessarily think of playing the Pink Panther theme. And I say the day in the context of, in my experience, when big bands were working and when the Madiri Big Band was just going to town. And let me say parenthetically, I wasn't the only piano player. There was a number of piano players who played with the band. 3 prominently that I can recall, which would be Gene Rizzo, Bob Carter, who I think back in the day was with Jimmy Dorsey's band, and myself. At different times, because you know my history with the Madiris is being, you know, there and then not there, and all of that. And now I can say, what was I talking about? Now I don't remember. Darn. And it was probably the thing I said, I'm going to forget about this. I hope. No, it wasn't, because I was trying to remember about keeping that little rhythm, that 1 o'clock jump solo in. That's right. The next we had Pink Panther. And back when the band was working in like the 90s in particular, and early 2000s, sure, that tune was probably in the book and might have get played once in a while. But there was less reason to play it back then, because the people who were coming to the shows were people who had gone to big band dances in their younger years. This was first generation stuff to them, and that isn't the case now. And it's not the best move to play all tunes from the 1930s if you play a big band concert today, because they're really not in anybody's long-term memory as their first-hand experience anymore. It's all nostalgia. But if you bring stuff in from, instead of, 90 years ago, 60 years ago, or 50 years ago, right? Then for that older generation, which is always going to be the audience for the big bands at this point, for that older generation, you're playing stuff now that's in their memory, and it reaches them. Pink Panther is a novelty thing, but then, so that's what I was saying back in the day. There would have been less of that. We would have stuck with the swing era book for the most part. But then Paula comes up after Pink Panther and then sings it back. I think she sings Close to You first. Whatever, my brain's not working. And it went on like that. I think she did One Less Bell to Answer, and I can't remember what else she did. And a couple of swingers. Embraceable You was an older tune. You'd Be So Nice to Come Home To. But if you're going to have a big band now, you're going to mix those things up. And people really will appreciate hearing what they remember hearing when they were younger. Connect yourself to your younger years, and you're golden, right? And that's what we were able to do. So we had 2 sets in this concert, and it was just like the old days. And we all miss it. So a wonderful sax player, Mary Lou Noonan, who, if you follow my Facebook page, you'll recall some weeks ago when I had a Blossom Deary concert with Sharon Sable, and Mary Lou was on the gig, and that's when my belt exploded. And Mary Lou came to the rescue with a sax case strap, and it fit me just like a belt. And it's like, yeah. And then there was another piece to it that got separated from it, and Sharon had one and I had the other, and I was going to bring it back to Mary Lou, but I didn't have both pieces, and I offered to pay her. I saw her yesterday and offered to pay her for it, and she said, no, I'm not going to take it. But I'm keeping that sax strap, and I intend to pay her for it, because that's like a stylish belt I might use on a particular gig. But did I mention ADD? I'm sure, because by now I've exhibited it 24 times. So Mary Lou and I, on the break in between sets, just standing off to the side, or maybe it was right before we went on, we're just talking about all those experiences that we had and all the people we got to play with. And especially someone like her, who played the Atlantic City showroom gigs, for years. And so all the great entertainers would come through, and all the great entertainers, you would do their shows and play for them, and just have experience of working with great people we all have, and that doesn't exist now. different things exist. The music business is nothing like it was. So nothing like it was, because it's all about, digital stuff now, and it was about, in general terms, orchestral stuff back then. And Mary Lou and I were just talking about it in terms of how grateful we are to have had those experiences, and we'll never not have those experiences. And of course, you can't share them with anyone except the people you shared them with initially, unless you're just talking about them. So it's melancholy in a way, but in a much deeper way, it's beautiful, and so wonderful to be able to be involved in this. My mind's going 14 directions at once. I'm thinking about Johnny Carson, Johnny Carson's big band. And I've said this before. If you watch me regularly, you probably heard me say it, that the people my age who were into that older era and into the big bands were hanging on to the Tonight Show because, that was the last big band that was working regularly all the time, every night, right? And the show wasn't about the band. Doc Severinsen was, a recognized figure on that show, but it was a Johnny Carson show, and it was about Johnny Carson and his cast. But us musicians were like focused on that band and the things that would happen there. And when Johnny Carson announced his retirement, which I don't know how long ahead of time it was, but it may have been like years. I think it may have been a couple of years. And if I'm right about that, that would be smart, because it gives everybody time to tie up the loose ends. And in that lead up to the Tonight Show band being disbanded, Tonight Show being gone, they released 2 LPs. And I don't know where they are anymore. I have boxes inside of boxes, but somewhere I have both of those LPs, and they were important to have. That's an era that's gone. And now perhaps I'm just rambling, so let me just play a tune. Let me stop playing a tune because something went through my head. So one thing that you never would know in a Mediri big band gig show like that, when I'm on it, is if he's going to pull out the trio. So Joe, Paul, and I, a little bit of history, and many of you know this, met in high school. We met in 1974. We started playing together in 1975, but we're calling 1974 the start year, so that next year we can mark that as our 50th year. And of course, the big band that we sort of modeled after, Benny Goodman, had their trio, and that's what we modeled after, the Benny Goodman trio in particular. Just piano and drums and clarinet. Benny Goodman and Gene Krupa and Teddy Wilson. I got the order mixed up. And what would happen back in the day with Benny Goodman is they would bring the trio or the quartet out for a feature, and those members, except for Gene Krupa, were not members of the regular band, like Teddy Wilson and Lionel Hampton. Unless Lionel Hampton was subbing for Gene Krupa on drums, they would come out and play, and there was another piano player who played in the big band. And I'd say more often than not, when I play with Mediri's for a festival or do something, at some point along the way, the trio would be featured. And I didn't think it would happen last night, and it didn't, but that's always a possibility that I need to be aware of. And my tie into the big bands initially was, more than anything, that we put this trio together that was modeled after the Benny Goodman trio, not the big band. Joe and Paul themselves ran with the whole big band concept. So I can say that, The small group Goodman stuff is absolutely a marriage of Joe, Paul, and I. That's the thing. The big band thing was their thing, and I was a part of it, at least for some of it, which was cool. So, yeah, one of the instrumentals we did at the end was Bugle Call Rag. It allowed everybody to stretch out. Right? And it's really a nothing thing. It's just a... It's just that progression over and over and over and over again, everybody solos. And it's just, can be fun. And he took it at a modest tempo, which is actually cool. Paul and I talked about that. We talked about everything with the gig. If you talk for hours after a gig, you can cover a lot of ground, right? Now, even though in a big band gig, you have scripts, you have the arrangements, and I likened it to a classical orchestra. You have the element of jazz, you have the element of improvisation and spontaneity. So an example of that was for the last tune. We were going to do Almost Like Being in Love. And Paula had gone off, and we did a couple of tunes, including Bugle Call Rag, and that was the big ta-da for the band. Then Paula comes back, and she walks over to me first as she's being introduced, and if she's gonna like whisper in my ear, I like, sometimes it's hard for me to discern what people are saying. I don't know that it's official. I haven't had it specifically diagnosed as auditory processing, but it's kind of in that vein where sometimes I can't make things out, which is a whole other issue with me playing music with other people. I'll talk about that at some point. She walks over, so I stand up so I can hear her. And she says that she wants to sing the first chorus of the tune Rubato. And it's like, so that just kind of like takes the arrangement and puts it over here. And so for that last tune, despite the arrangement, I don't forget what key she did in. And I'm not even sure I know the tune well. Let me see. But she was in that. That's the key she did. I have no idea. So she gets up there, and I didn't really know how much she was going to do or what was going to happen, if she was going to sing just the first phrase. What a day this has been, what a weary mood I'm in. Well, it's almost like being in love. And of course, I love playing rubato behind singers, or just accompanying singers by myself, period. And that was not a part of that gig until it was, with like 10 seconds notice for me, on that one chorus. And I was very reserved the whole gig. It was interesting. I was saying to Paul, because Paul had said that he and Joe really, didn't feel totally comfortable to the second set. It was like getting the sea legs back. And I said, well, yeah, because I felt really restrained and didn't feel comfortable playing a little out and noodling and stuff more that piano players can do in big band until the second set, and that's all came together, right? So it's like by the end of the gig, we were like feeling it, and it's like if we had got to start the gig over, it would have been great, but it was great to begin with. Am I making sense? Probably not. So it's like, without having time to think through it, I'm like, I'm listening to Paul, and I'm just trying to react and be myself. And of course, aware. And this awareness can always be a problem, that this is happening, and of course all eyes are on it. And this is kind of, my chance to nail down, well, if I made it about me, and that's when you get in trouble, my chance to nail down that I can play this role, and it's something I'm good at. compared to other things. But then you get that out of your head, and it's like you're just trying to make the music, and you're trying to. And don't have a recording of that. I recorded the first set, not the second set. But I hope I get to hear it. And she's going through, and I'm not really even comfortable that I'm going to nail all the chord changes. And I'm looking at the chart, and I think, okay, here's where the form is, I think. So I'm going to read here, because of course this wasn't in the chart to do this. And then she's going on. She's going onto the bridge, and I'm okay. Well, this is the bridge, and a couple of things. Am I sure about this? But I had to commit. It was actually it was freeing, and it was white knuckle at the same time. It was actually very cool. But one thing I wasn't doing, which I'm demonstrating now, is playing the melody. I was just accompanying behind her. So I was, and so I guess because I, on purpose, didn't do anything to draw attention to myself, and even and I didn't really go as deep as I hope I can at other points behind her. I was just keeping it simple and keeping it there, and we got through it. And I was just glad that I didn't being exposed like that played a big clunker or something, right? And Paul brought it up afterward in our little post-game conversation that he really liked it. Beautiful accompaniment, and it's like it. And I'd forgotten about it. And now that I'm just talking to you, I'm just going to just vamp and say the fact that I had forgotten about it probably validates that I was in the moment with it. And that's something with me, and this would be a good thing, possibly as the last thing to talk about. To do a big band gig like that, do a gig where there's a combination of freedom and the need to conform to structure and be very attached to it and read and stuff. Those two things are polar opposites and not connected to me, and I have to kind of be in the space for one or the other. And typically I'm in the space to be free and spontaneous, unless the circumstances of the gig don't allow that. Then I have to be in the other space, and then when it is time to be free and spontaneous, I have to kind of find it enough to do it. So in that regard, I was pleased yesterday because, like, when I had to take piano solos, I was able to get on my way enough and step back, and I only got lost in the arrangement of the chart one time. I was telling Paul back in the day, I don't know if I ever acknowledged this to Joe Paul. I probably did, but maybe not. That back in the day with the big band, I almost never got through a chart without losing my place. And I had to find my way back because I would always get distracted, and I'm better now at being able to stay focused. Even if then, and that was a part of it, me understanding that I needed it. I was doing the ADD meds, during that time. I don't now, but I've learned how to stay connected with it. The one time that I got lost in the chart was actually a chart that you didn't need to read. It didn't matter. It was the same thing all the time, except if you need to follow your way down so you know when you're at the end. It was Bugle. It might have been Bugle Call Rag, or it was that or one other tune that came right before it. It was similar that I didn't need to look at it because I knew it was coming. So I didn't mention this. Joe and Paul were really good. I got there, after they had already set the stage, and the piano was set. If this is the piano, the audience is over here. No, wait. Yeah. And the band is directly behind me, and I'm facing the wrong way. But that allows me to hear the band because there's going to be no monitor speaker. So the piano's not turned around, that the band's on the other side of the piano. That doesn't work for me, and they understand that. and the piano could open up to the audience, so we didn't have the piano mic'd, and it was a reasonably big, concert hall. So just the open piano was, and people were saying couldn't hear the piano. Well, during the band, the piano needs to be underneath. But could you hear me when I soloed? Yes. Well, then that's good, right? So the downside of that is that of course, when I thought Joe was going to cue me, I had to, do this. But if I wanted to see the actual band, I had to maybe play with one hand and almost turn around like this. And for that one tune, I decided to do it. Like before that, when like a solo started, I would turn around and see like which trumpet player was playing, and then after a while, I know from hearing. Like Randy Reinhardt, great trombone player, was on the gig. Three trombone players, and it's like, wow, that's got to be Randy, yeah, But I couldn't turn around much because I can't take my eyes off of this. Like for everybody else, the leaders, like in an orchestra, whatever, you have the music and you can just look over your music sheet. Me, no. If I do this, so that one tune that I did it for, it didn't matter, right? Until I realized, oh, it's a bassy thing. I don't know what it was, but I realized I didn't know when the last chorus was going to be because all of the chord changes were exactly the same. There were no other cues. You just followed down. And of course, you open up the solo section, so you actually wind up agreeing that you're going to play one section and repeat it many more times than it's written. But if you're like engaged with it and paying attention, you'll know where you're in. And I didn't, so I didn't know how to get out of the tune. It was the only time I got lost. So basically, I got lost in the simplest tune. But way back in the day, I would lose my place all the time. And the thing about being a piano player in a big band is more than anybody else, and certainly much more than any of the horns, you can veer off script. In fact, you're kind of expected to. You're given like an outline of what to do, sometimes written out, sometimes not. But if you know how to be tasteful and play things around and just, you can kind of be an improvising player in the piano book. But there's still some things you have to read and you have to know where you are. But I also realized last night how much I'm out of practice with that. And I was having that conversation with Cody Lovell, my young friend from Rehoboth area. Grew up in Rehoboth. He was my friend who was with the Glenn Miller Band right out of college for 4.5 years. So you talk about having big band experience on that level, he certainly does. But he's, settled in, it's been years since he's done that. And he's actually got a music-related but day gig. The same job that Joe Mederi has for another a store that supplies instruments to schools, rentals and such for band programs. And Joe Mederi is a road rep for Cole's Music. And now Cody Lovell's a road rep for Music and Arts. And he's like, when he was going to take that job, he was really heartened that Joe Mederi, who's somebody he really looks up to as a musician, has that same job. And it's like, okay, well, this is legit. Joe's doing it. I can do it, right? And now I forget why. But anyhow, I'm talking to Cody. I'm saying all that to say that he's not doing as much playing as he used to. He's still gigging and stuff, but he could go days. I think one time he went 2 weeks without touching his horn, which I think is an anomaly, but I remember him talking about it. Could be wrong. Correct me, Cody, if you're listening to this. But it was interesting to hear him say that, like, he's had to practice sight reading, because when you're a horn player and you're sight reading that whole book, which I couldn't do, and unless those guys play together all the time or have rehearsals, which is just logistically impossible, you have to have really good players who can sight read the book. And he was talking about things he missed, and he's out of shape and out of practice. Of course, whatever sight reading he can do on his worst day is so much better than I can do on my best day. So you're okay, Cody. So Anyway, this is probably a little bit of a just bleed over from the little post game conversation that Paul and I had last night about the Big Bang gig. And the idea of this stream is just to, you know, bring you. I used to call it Inside the Process. I changed the name to My View from the Piano Bench. But hopefully it's interesting or engaging to hear me talk about this stuff. So thanks for your feedback and comments. You know, some of you message me or email me, and I appreciate that. Appreciate all your engagement and all your support in whatever way it comes as we just continue on in this wonderful world of the arts that makes no sense while at the same time it's absolutely perfect. So thanks so much. Look forward to seeing you soon.